Testing, check. Bismillah.
That's okay.
They know who will win. Nawaz will win, right?
Well, the most recent that I've heard that he lost, but his party got like 50 or 60 seats.
Oh, really?
So he's going to put the games. No, he won't be because he doesn't have a majority. We'll see.
How does it work then?
So if you don't have a
Coalition.
majority, yeah, then you have to form a coalition. So there'll be more court cases and lawsuits. Who won?
How you doing? Good, good, good. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we're going to start in about 30 seconds. So please come to your seats if you haven't done so already. Alright, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family, to his companions, and their followers, and all the men and women that walk in their footsteps, and ask Allah to make us among them. Ameen. Jazakallah khair for joining us, brothers and sisters. This is the Tafseerah program. I think we're part 24 for Surat al-Baqarah. So we started Surat al-Baqarah in January of 2023. And, I'm hoping that we will finish Surat al-Baqarah before Ramadan. It doesn't look likely. But inshallah, I'll do what I can. We'll probably have maybe 2 more sessions of Tafseerah before Ramadan starts. or maybe 3. We'll see, inshallah, how it goes anyway. But as I mentioned before, many times as we've navigated through this incredible surah, that Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed throughout the Madani period. Although the bulk of it was revealed in the first 2 to 3 years, parts of Surah Al-Baqarah continued to come down even in year 9. Like throughout the Madani period, Surah Al-Baqarah was still coming in the backdrop as other surahs were coming down. Surah Al-Baqarah was the common theme, so to speak. And please forgive me, my voice is probably cracked a little bit after 3 khutbahs today and a lot of jet lag. You're running a little bit on fumes. So inshallah I'll do what I can. But again, the surah, because of its nature and because of its timing, it essentially is the very first surah to be revealed in the Madani period. Al-Mutaffifin, which is considered to be the first Madani surah, was revealed on the Prophet's way to Medina, and as he arrived, or as he arrives into Medina. And so essentially, even though Al-Mutaffifin is the first Madani surah, we consider Al-Mutaffifin to be the introduction or the preface, and Surah Al-Baqarah to be surah number 1. Even in the Quran itself, in the order of its collection, Surah Al-Fatiha, even though it comes first, but we consider Surah Al-Fatiha to be exactly that, Fatihatul Kitab, the preface of the book, the introductory surah. And we oftentimes consider Surah Al-Baqarah to be surah number 1 after that, so chapter 1, so to speak. Which tells us something really important, that Surah Al-Baqarah must have the qualities that define the character of this ummah. And after further examination of the surah, over the last year, we've come to a conclusion that there is this one particular ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa." I will establish or appoint a trustee of mine on earth. And so essentially we are all not just the creation of God, but we are also His khulafa. We are the trustees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. And if I send someone in my stead to do, then it is implied that that person has a job to do. There is a responsibility, there is a task, there's a mandate. You can't say this person is a khalifa unless you've given that person a particular job or a particular task. And the task that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us is to cultivate this earth for His own purposes, is to cause this earth to thrive for His purposes. And we said that the word that collectively encompasses this meaning is the word imaratul ard, cultivating the earth. Imara is the word for building something, and al-ard obviously is earth. So building the earth, in the spiritual sense, making sure that the purposes of God, not the purposes of man, are the ones that come to pass. We've been going through the different sections of Surah Al-Baqarah. I said it's built in 4 sections. We are at the very end of section 2. And inshallah ta'ala tonight, I think we're ayah number 246 or 247, something like that. Which is quite incredible because we're still at the very end of section 2. And section 2 of the surah was the prerequisites of Imaratul Ard. What does it take for a community to be truly the trustees of God on this earth? What does it take for a father to be a trustee of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his own family? What does it take for a wife to be a trustee of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with her husband and her children? What does it take for a teacher to be a trustee of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his or her students at school? What does it take for a community leader? What does it take for a king or a president? What does it take for the ummah to be representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to do the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth? So what are the prerequisites? And we went through a long list, and tonight inshallah ta'ala is the very last prerequisite that we will discuss together. And the very last prerequisite of Imaratul Ard is resilience. If you guys remember, we've talked about so many prerequisites. We talked about, there has to be, genuine love for people. You can't help people if you don't have genuine love for people. You have to have a desire to spread khayr, to spread good in the world. One of the prerequisites that we talked about is, over I think 3 or 4 sessions, we talked about a very important prerequisite, which is to see the components of unity between the members of the one ummah. Your eyes see more the common denominator that brings us all together than seeing or noticing the things that drives us apart from each other. Some people have a tendency to see the cup half full, others see the cup half empty. The Quran tells you that you need to see the cup half full. I've had this tremendous interest in the madhahib, over the years, as part and parcel of many other interests, obviously. But I've had a particular interest in the madhahib, not in the sense that we need to kind of bring all the madhahib together into just one madhab and forget about the differences. I think that would be absolutely foolish and quite impractical. There are differences that are reflective of the human differences that just cannot be overcome. However, the Sheikh Abu Zahra, and I really invite you to read some of his incredible works. Sheikh Abu Zahra has this, and he was an incredible scholar, from the first half of the 20th century, who was also invested so much in the idea of bringing the different groups of the Muslims together. And so he published a series of books. He started off first with the 4 madhahib. So, his first work was on Abu Hanifa, and then he published, an incredible treatise on Malik, then went into Shafi'i, and then he wrote a book about Imam Ahmad. And then he did something absolutely brave that no other scholar has done, for the longest time. And that is, he started investigating the other non-Sunni madhabs through Sunni eyes and through a Sunni lens and through a Sunni perspective. So he published his first book on Imam Zayd, Zayd ibn Ali Zayn al-Abidin. And Imam Zayd obviously is the founder of what today is the Zaydi madhab, which is, considering the turn of events in the world, the Zaydi madhab has actually, come into prominence because the Houthis of Yemen are Zaydis. But they're often accused of just being Shia. They're Shia. But if you actually study the Zaydi madhab, for example, you realize that the Zaydis are actually closer in their fiqh to the Hanafis than the Shafi'is, for instance, right? And so you will not, Imam Zayd upheld the imamah of Abu Bakr and Umar, and he did not go into the extremes that we've seen some of the Ja'faris have engaged with. And so Imam Sheikh Abu Zahra published his book on Imam Zayd, which, by the way, I'm actually reading right now. An incredible treatise, and exposes you to the ilm of Ahlul Bayt and the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt, which many of those who call themselves Sunni Muslims oftentimes neglect. And then after that, he published another book on Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad, who basically is Imam Zayd's nephew, but he was almost his age. And then after that, he published a book about Ibn Taymiyyah and so forth. But Imam Abu Zahra's, I think, attempt here is that he says that there is a difference between disagreement and conflict. There's a huge difference between disagreement and conflict. Disagreement is okay. Disagreement does happen. Husband and wife disagree with each other. Brothers and sisters disagree with each other. People within the same community, within the same family, they disagree with each other. But conflict is unjustifiable, right? And so he tries to find ways to bring the members of the same ummah together while upholding the disagreements, but trying to do away with the conflict. And I feel like, that is effort that is worth supporting. I take pride, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, here at Tarbiyah that, while, overall, I consider all my teachers to be of the Shafi'i, Ash'ari perspective, Shafi'i in their fiqh, Ash'ari in their aqidah, I find myself, while that is the bulk sum total of my background personally, as a student of sacred knowledge, I find myself, learning so much and being enriched so much by, studying the other perspectives. I grew up, around the Azharis, the official, if you take, for example, matters on divorce, for example, you find that the Azharis actually adopt more Ja'fari perspectives in the fiqh of divorce than they adopt, let's say, Hanafi or Shafi'i. In the mawarith, in the science of inheritance and so forth, the Azharis adopted a lot of Ja'fari, perspectives, because they found that to be more conducive, to helping the family and so on and so forth. For the vast majority, the Sunni perspective on mirath, on inheritance, for example, is that la wasiyata liwarith, that you cannot include those who naturally inherit you in your will. So you cannot say, I will give 50% of my wealth to my daughter, because your daughter naturally inherits you, so she is not included, she cannot be included in the will. In Ja'fari fiqh, for example, there is more freedom on this particular matter. So Azhar, and if you look at Egyptian family law today, adopts Ja'fari perspectives and allows people to include their own heirs in their wasiyah, in their inheritance, and there are many other such perspectives. The Fiqh Council of North America also adopted Ja'fari perspectives on divorce because of the huge mess that was happening, where men divorce their wives at will. The Ja'faris require 2 witnesses at the nikah and 2 witnesses at the time of divorce as well, to ensure that when the man divorces his wife, that the man actually does it intentionally and has thought it through. It's not a spur of the moment kind of thing. And so, a lot of Sunni scholars have adopted that perspective because they believe that this would help keep the family together. And I can share with you so many other examples where once you have removed sectarianism from your mind, and you've looked at, the Ja'faris and the Zaydis, I'm not including the Ismailis in this perspective for many reasons. I think they have really gone far off the cliff when it comes to orthodoxy, to the extent that it's just nearly impossible to include them in legitimate mainstream Islamic madhahib without committing an atrocity, right? So I'm not including the Ismailis here, although I'm not necessarily suggesting that we shouldn't talk to them. I'm just not including them in this list because I think it's going to take a lot more effort to bring the Ismailis on board. But at least with the Ja'faris and the Zaydis, we as we call ourselves Sunnis, we should exert additional effort, because again, one of the prerequisites of an ummah that has been given the khilafah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth is to find ways to come together, and not to find ways to move apart from each other, right? So here at Tarbiyah, for example, I can name probably, I want to say 20 to 25 Shia families that come here on a regular basis, right? From mostly from the Ja'fari persuasion, but also some Zaydis as well. And you meet them, you see them, you've prayed with them, and you've laughed with them, and you've gone out to lunch with them, but you've never talked about madhabs, but you realize that is their background. Again, I take pride in that, and I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that our community and our ummah again finds ways to come closer to each other, because the enemy's at the door, and they want us to be divided and torn apart. You have to ask yourself at the end of the day, who benefits from this? Who benefits from this? And so tonight, I wanted to talk about the very last prerequisite of Imaratul Ard. What does it take for an individual or a family or a group of people or a community or an ummah to be ready, to be in the proper state of preparedness to take on the job of serving as the khulafa, as the trustees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. And like I said, that quality is resilience. You have to be resilient. You have to be strong, you have to be purposeful, and you have to keep pushing forward and pushing through. If you remember, one of the prerequisites of Imarat al-Ard that I mentioned before, it was the desire to spread good, right? But also the desire to protect good. You cannot spread khair unless you attempt to defend khair. Okay? And we had an entire evening to talk about the concept of jihad, because that is, and we talked about, jihad al-daf' and so on and so forth. There's different types of jihad and what it means and how, which categories it falls under, and so on and so forth. The removal of obstacles is just as important as spreading the da'wah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If all of your words fall on deaf ears or are hitting a wall, at one point or the other you're going to need to remove that wall so that the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to perpetuate, right? So we talk about resilience, how to keep pushing through. And the example, this is so fascinating, the example that is used in the Quran is an example from the story of the Hebrews, the story of Bani Israel, right? Which is, again, very, very interesting. The inclusion of Bani Israel in Surah Al-Baqarah thus far has been in a negative light, more or less. We talked about Bani Israel as an experiment that has failed, so that we learn from that. And quite honestly, and I think this is no secret anymore, continues to fail to this day, right? Everything that could possibly be done to damage the image, of Bani Israel continues to happen to this day, right? And so, I don't want to get into that because there's a lot to cover here. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that the Quran is very fair and very nuanced. The Quran does not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, because it's coming from God, the Quran does not allow itself to engage in the bashing of one group of people or the other, okay? The Quran does highlight the mistakes committed by the Hebrews on a regular basis, systematically, okay? And because it does that, the Quran is often accused of being, having some anti-Jewish tendencies, all right? Even in the mind of some Muslims, they actually believe that the Quran has anti-Jewish tendencies, or the Quran is just opposed to Bani Israel in general. In reality, and I will show you, the Quran is very, very nuanced. When we say Bani Israel, what do we mean? We mean, people that may have betrayed, people that may have turned back on their heels, people that did not honor their words, people that did not honor their promises, people that may have murdered their own prophets, right? This is the sort of like a stereotypical image that we have in our minds. And these things are mentioned in the Quran. However, when we say Bani Israel, we also mean Musa alayhi salam, don't we? Right? When we say Bani Israel, we also mean the followers of Musa alayhi salam, the righteous followers of Musa alayhi salam. We mean the believers that crossed the sea with Musa alayhi salam. When we say Bani Israel, we mean Yusha, Joshua, right? Who entered into the land of Palestine and defeated, the Canaanites and defeated the Philistines, and I'll talk about that, a little bit later. When we say Bani Israel, we mean Dawood alayhi salam. And we mean the righteous believers of Bani Israel that lived under his reign. When we say Bani Israel, we mean Sulaiman alayhi salam. I know it's hard for you to, Sulaiman was Jewish, right? They were all Bani Israel, right? There are people who are mentioned in negative light and people who are mentioned in positive light. Actually, in a very, very positive light in the Quran. Both are from Bani Israel. Isa alayhi salam was also from Bani Israel. Zakaria is from Bani Israel. Yahya is from Bani Israel. Maryam is from Bani Israel. 3/4 of the good, beautiful stories that you know from the Quran are stories about good people from Bani Israel as well. So you have to be careful, right? لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا. This is one of the most essential qualities of the Quran. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, do not let the injustices committed by other people cause you to commit injustice yourself. Because you are supposed to be driven by your own morals and your own values and not the actions of people. Remember, I think I told you this before, when Umar al-Mukhtar al-Sanusi, the leader of the Libyan resistance against the Italians, when his followers would keep telling him, look at what the Italians did this to us, the Italians did this to us, the Italians are killing our civilians, the Italians are killing our children, his response has always been the same. It is Rasulullah and not them that is our teacher. They're not our teachers. It is the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We derive our morals from him, not from them. So the Quran highlights, for the purpose of teaching and educating us, the negative actions committed by Bani Israel and also the positive actions, يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا. There are very, very good characters that have reached, heights of guidance and heights of effectiveness in teaching the deen and so forth when they marched on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we talk about resilience as a prerequisite of Imaratul Ard, tonight we share, inshallah ta'ala, one such story, a story of honor and dignity from Bani Israel. This is the story of Talut and Jalut, the story of Saul and Goliath, which inshallah I will talk about tonight. Hopefully inshallah we'll finish it tonight. But that story started way earlier. The story of Talut and Jalut started way earlier. All right? There is a filtration process of sorts that was imposed upon the Hebrews from day one. All right? It is almost that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continued to subject them to one test after the other, one trial after the other, for the purpose of thinning their ranks. You know what that means? To thin their ranks, to refine them. Put them through the test. Those who fail are, thank you so much. Please step aside, right? And the numbers keep reducing, keep decreasing until there is a small cohort of people that was deserving of the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the end. Okay, so you start from the very beginning. When Musa alayhi salam started his call in Egypt, right? He went to Pharaoh and he said, "Let my people go," right? They're all enslaved by the Egyptians. Okay, they're being subjected to horrific carnage. The firstborn, male child is murdered and so on and so forth. Yet when Musa alayhi salam actually started calling them to the faith, the vast majority of them did not follow him. Why? Because it was safer for them to stay with what's familiar. And what's familiar and what's predictable is, I'm just a slave. If I mind my business, if I, be careful, if I act wisely, I will survive. I don't want to take any risks, right? So the safety of being a slave for them was more favorable than the risk of freedom, all right? And that is quite interesting because that spirit continues to repeat itself even in the modern age, where people choose the restrictions of slavery and they let the government control their lives in order to buy themselves some safety or some security. But ultimately what ends up happening is that they continue to be enslaved. Freedom, takes some risks. It's fascinating because, I'm reading this book. It's called 1775. It's a book that describes the year before the most important year in American history, 1776, when George Washington defeated the Redcoats, right, the Brits. And so, I keep thinking about everything that happened in 1775, and I realized that had George Washington not taken the city of Boston, because this is how the victory started, right? They took Boston from the Brits. Had Washington not taken the city, if the American rebels were defeated, when you think about it, George Washington would have been actually tried for treason, and he would have been executed by the crown, right? And he would have gone down in history as this, marginal rebel, that was, what's that? As a terrorist, right? He would have gone down in history as a terrorist. Why is George Washington became the first president, this polished figure. And by the way, compared to other military generals of his time, he was not the most superior. He did not have the greatest knowledge. He did not have any war experience, serious war experience before the War of Independence. It's fascinating when you read that history. It would have been very, very easy for him to be defeated, would have gone down in history as a terrorist, And that would have been that. And, you know, you and I would be like speaking English with a British accent right now, right? You know, this would have been like a territory of the United Kingdom. Would have been a completely different history. And so these turns and twists and turns of fate and twists and turns of the events of history, you know, it can't escape you when you look at these things and realize that, you know, in as history unfolds and as these events of history unfold before our eyes, you realize that there is divine wisdom behind all of these things. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted things to, you know, take one turn or the other. And so there is a filtration process that took place in the army of George Washington. He had to lose so many battles, came to the brink of complete and utter annihilation and destruction. Deserters, you know, en masse leaving his army. It was one of the absolute most brutal winters in New England in 1775. You know, literally parts of the ocean were frozen. Supplies were not coming. You know, everything just, it looked so grim. The vast majority of the army is gone, right? And there is, I want to say, I shouldn't say the vast majority, but a significant portion of the army is gone, right? But those who stuck with him were the true soldiers that won the war. And that was that. You know, in fact, they say that the Brits left Boston and boarded their ships with just at the sight of the rebels surviving through the winter. They say if they survive through the winter, they're going to eat us alive. And they left without atrocities. There was actually very little contact between the two armies and the Brits. So sometimes that filtration process is essential to distinguish between those who make claims and talk the talk and those who actually walk the walk. And when you see the numbers thinning over time, you should not be concerned. To the contrary, you should see divine providence. You see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God is intervening. The ranks are thinning. That means God is intervening. Something good is going to come of all of this, right? And so the filtration started from the very beginning, right? There are, you know, again, I keep going back to the American story. There are loyalists, the loyalists that supported the crown, okay? And they gladly accepted to be subjects of the king. They said no to the notions of freedom and liberty and so forth that were, you know, put together by the founders and so on. And they were perfectly fine. Hey, we just want to be the subjects of the king. Don't talk to us about freedom. We don't want freedom. Why? Because freedom meant change. Freedom meant risk. Freedom meant war, right? We don't want that. We just want to be slaves of the king. And that would have been enough for us, okay? And so many of those Hebrews, they actually wanted to stay as slaves. You know, don't talk to us about freedom, Musa, okay? You're a terrorist. It's not just the Pharaoh, it's also many of the Hebrews that called him a terrorist. They did not want that, right? But those who wanted this, and followed Musa, and they were given, you know, it was a mass movement. You know, you have to spread the word very secretively. You have to tell people, oh, on the morning of this and that day, we're going to meet at this place and we're going to march together like 100,000. Some people say it was 1 million. I mean, we really have like all kinds of different estimates of the number of the Jews, the Hebrews that were in the Exodus. Right? So between 100,000 and 1 million, with estimates in between. Imagine, you know, the type of operation that is involved in getting those people to leave their houses, sneak out of their houses and out of their masters' homes without anyone noticing, right? So that they have a head start, and when their masters wake up in the morning and realize that the slaves are gone and, you know, inform Pharaoh, and Pharaoh mobilizes the army, they're already either crossed or basically about to cross. And so many of them, they refused to follow Musa alayhi salam in the first place. So again, the ranks are being thinned. And then those who actually followed Musa alayhi salam, when the permission came for them to start marching on the Exodus, historians say that more than 70% of them refused to go with Musa. Oh, no, that's too much. I can't. I love you, Musa, but I can't come with you. This is too risky. If they chase me down, if they found me, they will kill me for sure, right? So that many of them would not go. So now the numbers are smaller. The Exodus, now all of them are coming onto the sea in order to cross. Historians say so many of them, at the sight of the split sea, they were scared. They were frightened. They would not cross. Like literally, you can look with your own eyes. You see the shore on the other side. You see freedom. You see providence, right? You see liberty on the other side, but you're scared. You don't want to walk. I mean, imagine there's walls of water on both sides, so they were scared. We're not crossing. Sorry, we're not crossing with you, right? And then those who actually had the courage to cross, they start acting up with Musa alayhi salam. So they see some people worshipping their own idol gods. So they say to Musa, اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم آلهة. Well, why don't you make a little god for us like people? They're worshipping a god over there. And Musa alayhi salam, has to tell them, you just experienced the most incredible miracle any human being had ever seen, and you're still asking me to make you an idol god. Like, there's something wrong with you, right? Of course, not all of them did this, but some did, okay? Later on, they start complaining about the quail and the pigeons, and they want the fava beans and the garlic, and so they start complaining about the food, okay? Again, the ranks are thinning. And then the fitna of the Samaritan, right? Musa alayhi salam goes and he talks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Mount Sinai for 40 days, and what happens? Chaos in the community. The Samaritan goes around and he starts collecting jewelry from the women. He melts the jewelry and creates the calf made of gold, and he invites many of the Hebrews to worship the calf. Did all of them worship the calf? No, some did. Right? Some did. Harun was in their midst, and he decided not to interfere, for fear of dividing the community further. Right? And so those people were punished, يَتِيهُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ 40 سَنَةً. They will be caused to wander the earth aimlessly for 40 years until that entire genetic pool, so to speak, dies out. All right? Now, you would think the cream of the crop, the best of the best, is what remains in the end. Okay? Now the command came, we need to enter into the land of Palestine and fight until we get to Jerusalem, the promised land. That's the whole point of the Exodus, right? So some of them start saying what? اذهب أنت وربك فقاتلا إنا هاهنا قاعدون. Musa, we can't. إن فيها قوما جبارين. The Canaanites and the Philistines, these people are ferocious. We can't fight them. Please. You and God go. And when you guys are done with the fight, let us know and we're going to come. Right? You see the filtration process? And so, I would say 90% of them at this point are gone. And only a small group is left. And Musa alayhi salam passed away. He died. Imagine. And this, by the way, I can give another khutbah about this. Just notion alone. A lifetime. I mean, think about it. At the very end, what did Musa gain? I mean, this is a man who had a very confused childhood, right? Torn apart from his own family, raised by the most evil man on earth, right? Being taught all kinds of bad things. I mean, you're the crown prince of Egypt. You're probably taught a lot of corrupt things. So when you finally realize who you are, you have to unlearn everything that they taught you in the court of Pharaoh, right? And then he hurts someone, and then he has to flee the country as a fugitive, goes away across the desert, lives in Midian, gets married, a completely different culture, and then he comes back to Egypt, and then he becomes a prophet with that promise of delivering the Israelites and taking them to the promised land. His life is one cycle of struggle after the other, and when he's literally right there at the border, he dies. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want him to see the flower, the fruit of his effort, to teach his community and to teach us that it's not always the case that you put the effort and then you see the fruits of your labor. Not always the case. And you should be perfectly happy if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected you to do his work, even if you end up dying before the work is completed. So he dies. And who takes charge of the Hebrews at that point? The next prophet in line is Yusha. Remember Yusha? Yusha, or in the Bible, Joshua. He's referred to the Quran as Fatahu in Surah Al-Kahf. He was the servant that carried Musa's stuff as they went to meet the righteous man Al-Khidr alayhi salam. Right? So this servant becomes the prophet and the leader and the general that led the Hebrews into battle. They fought the Canaanites and they conquered the city of Jerusalem, and now there is a kingdom. It's a promised land, right? Now the kingdom of God was established. But are the threats over? No. Because in addition to the Canaanites, there was another very ferocious force, very powerful force in Palestine that was called the kingdom of the Philistines. And the kingdom of the Philistines was led by this ferocious man. I mean, from his descriptions, it looked like he's 7'5" or something, right? Massive human being. His name was Jalut in the Quran, or Goliath in the Bible, right? So that's where the Quranic story starts from. It starts from the time after Yusha alayhi salam died. There is chaos in the Hebrew community. They don't have a king at this point. They have a prophet, but they don't have a king. And their prophet is not named in the Quran, but again, we find references in the biblical tradition when we don't have any references in the Quran or the Hadith. The Bible calls him Samuel. He's not mentioned in the Quran. Nabiyyun lahum. It just the Quran says their prophet, right? So that's where the story starts right here. But I want you, again, pay attention to the filtration process, because that will actually continue throughout the story as well. So Musa alayhi salam died. Joshua, Yusha, died. Now Samuel is the prophet, but they don't have a king. Looks like there was a lot of internal fighting. There was civil war. There was a lot of fighting from the Canaanites, a lot of attacks from the Philistines. The Philistines keep taking territory from them, keeping attacking them, skirmishes, raids, banditry, all kinds of things that are happening. And the Israelites now, after reaching the great height of victory, now they're suffering again. This time at the hands of the Philistines. All right. So what do? That's, I think, when Ayah 246 comes into play. ألم تر إلى الملأ من بني إسرائيل من بعد موسى إذ قالوا لنبي له مبعث لنا ملكا نقاتل في سبيل الله. Have you seen the leaders of Bani Israel after Musa, when they went to their prophet Samuel, and they said to him, please establish a king for us so that we go and fight for the sake of God, defend ourselves, defend our families. These Philistines, we have to stop them, because this is really becoming unacceptable and it's becoming inappropriate, right? But their prophet was kind of skeptical a little bit. He asked them, right? هل عسيتم إن كتب عليكم القتال ألا تقاتلوا? What if God mandates fighting on you and then you refrain from fighting? What if you chicken out? What if you get frightened and scared and you actually don't fight? So you're coming to me, all gung-ho. Oh, prophet of God, give us permission to fight. Establish a king for us. Okay, what if I said, okay, we'll do that. What if you get frightened and you don't actually do it? So what if you're just making hollow promises? You're talking the talk without walking the walk. So their response was very simple. وَمَا لَنَا أَلَّا نُقَاتِلَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَقَدْ أُخْرِجْنَا مِنْ دِيَارِنَا. I mean, how can we not fight when they've expelled us from our homes and they hurt our families and they've taken our stuff? We will fight. You have our word. We promise you. That's what I always say. Don't make promises you cannot keep. Be reasonable in your statements and be reasonable in your promises. Don't make hyperbolic statements. Don't make unreasonable statements. Just the very loud statements. Always be mild. Be mild in the statements that you make. Right? Prophet of God, it's possible that some of us might get frightened, but we're all human. We're all weak. Maybe we will fight, and hopefully, inshallah, we will fight. Pray for us. But they were so adamant on their response. Oh, what are you talking about? Of course we're going to fight. Right? فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالُ تَوَلَّوْا إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْهُمْ. When the command of God actually came for them to fight, the fight that they requested, right? Most of them decided not to fight. They kind of checked out. Do you see the filtration process continues? SubhanAllah. Even after they've entered the land of Palestine, their ranks are still being filtered. Remember, the ultimate goal here is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to establish for the Hebrews a kingdom like no other. Something that was unprecedented in history and will never happen ever again. And so the ranks needed to be tested and tested and tested continuously until, again, the select few remains in the end, and that is the group that receives the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So most of them decided not to fight, even though they requested it. And some decided to fight. Now the question becomes, who's going to lead us into battle? All right? So please, talk to the Creator and establish a king for us. Now it's the funniest thing. It tells you multiple things. Number one, it tells you that they don't have a king. Right? But it also tells you that their prophet is not their king either. Right? It was like this religious leadership, and it's interesting because Muslim commentators actually say that there was the 12 clans of Bani Israel, right? They say that prophethood was always in one clan, in the descendants, in the descendants of Yusuf, one clan, and that political leadership was in another clan, and that was kind of the balance of power, in that community. Okay. Now Saul, Talut, who was established as their king, comes from a completely different clan, and that's why they all got very upset, because he did not come from the expected clan of leadership or the clan of power. So if you look at ayah number 247, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ بَعَثَ لَكُمْ طَالُوتَ مَلِكًا. Okay? So first, they ask for permission to fight. God grants the permission to fight. Most of them chickened out. And then they ask for a king. God grants them a king. And it says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ بَعَثَ لَكُمْ طَالُوتَ مَلِكًا. This is not a human decision. God is the one that established Talut, or Saul in the Bible, as your king. So that they got so upset at this. And their response was, he's not rich enough to be our king. He's not rich enough to be our king. Again, see, the ranks, continue to be tested and they continue to be thinned out. All right? قال إن الله اصطفاه عليكم وزاده بسطة من العلم والجسم. Allah is the one that selected him, and that should be enough for you. But in addition to that, Allah gave him two advantages, right? Number one, he has great knowledge. Number two, he has great physical strength. What else do you need? What else do you need from a king? What does it matter if he comes from a wealthy family or not? He's going to be your king. So many of them, were very upset and they refused. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to make a case for Talut as their king, right? So he gave him a miracle, which made some Muslim commentators to say that Talut was also a prophet, which is interesting because, you would have Samuel and you would have Saul, both simultaneously in the same community. It doesn't make much sense to me. But some, Mufassirin said that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a miracle with him, then, this is what he does with prophets. Either way, what was the miracle? The Hebrews had this very treasured chest, sacred chest, where they kept all the artifacts and all the personal belongings of their prophets, particularly Musa and Harun. The tablets of the Torah, the staff of Musa, the turban of Harun, and other personal belongings that belonged to those two prophets. And that was their most treasured item. They kept it. The Christians call it the Ark of the Covenant, right? And the Quran calls it a tabut, right? The treasure chest, or the treasured box, right? but the Christians call it the Ark of the Covenant. And so during the Civil War and during the attacks, the Philistines had actually captured the Ark of the Covenant from the Hebrews, and they lost their most treasured item. That's the most important thing that they had. The Philistines had taken it. So in order to support the case for Talut as their king, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused this miraculous event to happen where angels actually carried the Ark of the Covenant and brought it to the Hebrew community in a divine act of intervention. Right? Like, it doesn't get better than that. All right? So the scholars said most of them kind of muffled their anger and decided to reluctantly follow Talut, in his march against the Philistines. So that you see that in 248. وقال لهم نبيهم إن آية ملكه أن يأتيكم التابوت فيه سكينة من ربكم وبقية مما ترك آل موسى وآل هارون تحمله الملائكة. Right? The sign that the dominion of Talut is legitimate is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send the Ark of the Covenant. It will bring you a lot of comfort and consolation, and it will have in it the artifacts of Musa and Harun, and it will be carried by the angels. I mean, that's a pretty compelling case, right? So they decided to march and follow Talut in his war against the Philistines. 249. فَلَمَّا فَصَلَ طَالُوتُ بِالْجُنُودِ. The minute Talut left the camp and marched forward with his soldiers, he did not introduce himself. He did not, start the training process. He did not organize the army into, battalions. He gave them the strangest instruction. He said, pretty soon, we're all going to get very thirsty. We're going to run out of water. And we're going to come across a beautiful flowing river. Some of you are going to be so thirsty, you're going to want to fill your canteens and you're going to want to fill your stomachs with the water. No, you can't do that. You can only have a handful, just one handful of water, and drink it. You cannot fill any containers, nothing. Do you hear me? They said, yes. We listen and obey. If this was just a general training his army, that would have not been his first command. There's a million other things that he could have done. But because they're being filtered and the ranks are being thinned at the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Talut was doing what he's told. Right? The point is not to win. The point is, with whom are we going to win? It's not about numbers. And again, we're going to come to these great conclusions, inshallah, in just a few minutes. So again, it's going to be this river. It's going to be super tempting. You're all going to be very, very, very thirsty, but you can't touch it except, إِلَّا مَنْ اغْتَرَفَ غُرْفَةً بِيَدِهِ. You can only take one handful and drink from it. You cannot fill your containers. Right? فَشَرِبُوا مِنْهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Most of them drank their fullest. And the minute they drank their fullest, what did Talut do? Thank you so much, guys. You can go home now. You are no help to me. What are you talking about? We just drank some water. You knew the rules. I said you can't. The whole point here is that if you are supposed to be the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the trustee of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you cannot just give in to lusts. You cannot give in to immediate gratifications. It's like Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he saw one of the companions, eating something. So he's asking, why are you eating this? It's like some kind of a sweet from Persia, which was considered luxury. So Umar is asking a man, why are you eating this? He says, I bought it because I had so much desire for it. What a lame response. He says, أَفَكُلَّمَا اشْتَهَيْتَ اشْتَرَيْتَ. Every time you desire something, you just buy it. Umar was talking about the problem of consumerism, for 1400 years ago. Every time you desire something, you just buy it. Is that how it is? There's no discipline. There's no self-control, right? And so the khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala need to have some self-discipline. You can't just be tempted, and that was the lesson. Yeah, you're thirsty? Okay. We're not saying die out of thirst. Just take a little bit of water. It should be enough. And continue to march forward. Never lose sight, of your goals. And this is, again, all you parents out here. I've been applying this in my own life, and I've been saying this to the community. As a parent, you have one job. One job as a parent. What is your job? Is to say no. That's it. There's nothing else that you need to do as a parent. Your job is not to be an entertainer for your kids. You're not a monkey for your children. You're not a clown. Your job is not to befriend them. It's not to please them. These are all Western concepts. Your job is to be the dam that keeps the water behind it. Your job is to prevent. Your job is to stop. Your job is to say no, right? You're not supposed to be popular. You're not supposed to be, the most liked parent, right? That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to stand between them and shaitan. And that is going to require you to be very unpopular at times. And when your kids grow older, they will look back and in hindsight, they will understand. Thank God that we had parents that stood against us when we wanted to do these silly instant gratification things, right? When we were during Umrah, my kids, without going into the details, one of my kids requested something. And the other kid said, yeah, Dad, let's have this thing. All the circumstances are perfectly favorable. And there was absolutely no reason for me to say no. And I was about to say yes. And then I remembered my own lessons. I was like, actually, we're not going to do that. But why? You give us a good reason. Not this time. And so my wife is silent the whole time. And then, after the kids are gone and they're so upset, right? She asked me, was there a particular reason? He said, no. I mean, it just seemed to me that what they requested was not unreasonable. And I said, they went for Umrah, right? They traveled, they ate, they enjoyed, they had fun, they slept at nice hotels. They can't think that life is all just hunky-dory and whatever I ask for is just going to be there. Because I'm a privileged American kid, I get to have whatever I want. No. Sometimes I just have to say no, for no reason. Just to make them upset. For like an hour and a half, they're going to be upset. And just realize that there is still pain in life, and there's still struggles, and I don't get to have everything, right? And then, wallahi, less than half an hour later, their mood was perfectly fine, and they're happy, and they forgot about it. Because that's the thing. That's what the nafs does. Oh my God, I see something, I want it. I see this, I want that. I see that, I want this. Right away. But when you teach yourself the discipline of, I don't, just because I desire it doesn't mean I should have it. Right? That is one of the greatest lessons in life. And again, the khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should have that kind of self-discipline. Do I need to have this? Do I must have this? Right? Is it really necessary? Even if I can afford it, even if I have the money, even if I have the time, even if I have the resources, but do I really need to do it? Okay? And so there's nothing haram or wrong or unethical or immoral about drinking water for a thirsty army that has been one day without water. But there is a great lesson here, again, to be taught. And that's the very first order of business for Talut. All right? You can only have just a handful of water, and that's it. And the vast majority of the army failed the test. And now the numbers are thinner and thinner and thinner and smaller and smaller and smaller. All right? Now you would think, again, that the remaining soldiers with Talut are the best of the best. I mean, these are the guys. These are the guys that will have Jalut's head. Okay? Still, the test continues. When they realize that, oh my God, the enemy is now within sight. And many of the army, when they saw how big the army of Goliath was, right? قالوا لا طاقة لنا اليوم بجالوت وجنوده. No, we can't. We can't handle these guys. No. When you have cold feet? You've been good the whole time. Like the best of the best. Discipline. Perfect. You really passed every test with Talut. But you come at that point and you see the enemy and just somehow, you just like, oh my God. You freeze. And Talut says to them, all right guys, no hard feelings. Please, thank you so much. Go home. You're done. Wait, it's just give us a minute. No. Because the whole point is to thin the army so that we have this cohort of people that remain in the end that will deserve the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why does the army have to be thin? I will tell you in just 1 second, right? Now, everyone that could have been removed from the army has already been removed. And that's why the remaining soldiers that stood their ground with Talut at that moment are the ones, when they looked at the army of Goliath, they said, in the dua here, قال الذين يظنون أنهم ملاقو الله كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله. Those who knew with certitude that they are destined to meet their Lord, they replied, how often has a small host overcome a great host by God's leave? It's not about numbers. It's never about numbers. In fact, that is the lesson, is to show the Hebrews, and by extension show us, the Ummah, the Khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's never about the numbers when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the equation. It's not about how physically strong you are. It's not about how wealthy you are. It's not about how many there are of you. You know, it's if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the equation, it has nothing to do with numbers. All right? وَلَمَّا بَرَزُوا لِجَالُوتَ وَجُنُودِهِ. Now they're in the thick of battle. Actual contact between the two armies. Right? وَلَمَّا بَرَزُوا لِجَالُوتَ وَجُنُودِهِ قَالُوا. This is a beautiful dua, I think, that we covered in Ramadan last year or the year before. Right? رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. Right? That was their dua. Our Lord, shower us with perseverance in adversity and make firm our steps and give us victory against the people who deny the truth. That was their dua. You know, commentators say how many people remained with Talut? About 300. From tens of thousands that set out in the army, only about 300 remained with them, right? 300 is an interesting number. You know, it reminds you of Badr, right? But there's another example of history where 300 stood against a massive army. The Spartans. Remember that story, right? When they stood against the Persians. And so this is an interesting number. You know, regardless of whether it was 300, a little bit more, a little bit less, it was a very small number that won the battle. But here's the thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to teach you a lesson. 300 of the best, most trained, most disciplined soldiers. It's like the Spartans. You would think, yeah, of course. I mean, the Spartans, these were the cream of the crop. These guys were, their face, their smile in the face of death. So you would think, because they were 300 of the best soldiers, that's why they won. But even that would be blasphemous. Because you're still putting stock in the strength of human being. And not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So victory comes through who? Again, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it came in the most unexpected form. Victory came in the form of this scrawny little teenager. The underdog, the most unknown of all. Someone that was not enlisted in the army. He did not participate in the battle. He was just there because he was bringing food to his brother, who was a soldier in the army. All his qualifications was that he was just good with a slingshot. That's all he was good at. You know, he was also he dabbled a little bit with shield making. He was a blacksmith and stuff like that. But his thing was he was really good with a slingshot, right? But again, there's a huge difference between a little kid who uses a slingshot to hunt birds, right, or to annoy his friends, versus using the slingshot in one of the most decisive battles in history. Okay, but Dawood alayhi salam, this young little scrawny underdog, walks in the ranks of the 300 men that remain, his brother, he gives him some food, and he hears Goliath across the valley. Goliath is this massive, domineering man, right? His voice sounds like a speaker system. So he keeps hurling and uttering these blasphemies, these profanities, against God and against, the religion of Israel and everything. And Dawood alayhi salam was so offended. He's like, what? You guys letting this guy just get away with these words? What? No one is gonna do anything about it. And of course, all the other soldiers are like, dude, take it easy. Okay, this guy's like 17 times your size. All right, but little Dawood is like, no, I'm not gonna let this go. And in the heat of anger, in the heat of that moment, he weighs his slingshot. Kind of selects, one of the best rocks that he had, in his bag, and he puts it in the slingshot, and he stretches and he swings, and bam, strikes Goliath right in the forehead. And it's like the movies. He falls on his back like a plank. Have you seen a plank fall before? When the plank falls, which part of it hits the ground first? The head, right? Because he's so tall, when he fell, his head hit the ground first, and the man died on the spot. It was like a sniper. You're absolutely right. Yes. And of course, the army looks right and looks left. Their leader is gone. There's no point in fighting. And they just surrendered. There was no battle. There was no fighting. Right? Sometimes victory comes through the effort of human beings. You have to plan, you have to train, you have to do all of that. But the vast majority of the time, victory comes through the planning and plotting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's that. And that is the greatest lesson, right? So, the ferocious king of the Philistines is down. And, as the story goes, it's not mentioned as much, it's not mentioned in the Quran, but it's mentioned in some of the apocryphal narrations, from Hebrew sources and so forth, that he was celebrated so much. And he was basically given a rank in the army very, very quickly. In the next few years or so, he climbs up the ranks and he becomes the most important general, and then eventually is sent prophethood by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Dawood alayhi salam becomes the great prophet king that he was. Lays the foundations of the kingdom of Israel to mulkun la yanbaghi li ahadin min ba'di, to a dominion that would never be given to anyone before or after, and that is the dominion of Sulaiman alayhi salam, right? And that was the absolute height of the kingdom of heaven. And when I say the kingdom of heaven, I'm not going to say they're Jews either. They were Muslim. Bani Israel, at that moment, the followers of Dawood and the followers of Sulaiman alayhi salam were Muslims. They were the Muslims of their time. Okay, this is how the Quran treats the story of the Hebrews. Highlights the negative when it's necessary, and highlights the positive when it is necessary as well. تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وإنك لمن المرسلين. These are God's messages. We convey them unto you, setting forth the truth. Verily, you are among those who have been entrusted with a divine message. That is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concluding this section. And so, again, the story, tells you the notion of playing the long game. You have to play the long game. If you are a slave of the Egyptians at the time of Musa alayhi salam, you would have not possibly imagined that a couple of generations down the road, there will be the greatest kingdom that the world had ever seen, led by the Hebrews. Come on, man, what are you talking about? Be reasonable. We're all slaves here. There's no way. It'll be thousands of years before this changes. It wasn't thousands of years. It was just a couple of generations, right? And so, your job as the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth is to keep planting those seeds. Is to keep marching forward, keep pushing forward. Don't worry about the results. Don't worry about the fruit. Don't worry about the flower. You don't need to see the fat lady sing, as they say, right? Just lead up to it. It may happen in your lifetime, and it may not. And it doesn't matter. If it happened in my lifetime, it's a cherry on top. It would have been nice, to have lived under, the great kings of old. Would have been nice to have lived under, Umar ibn Khattab, or to have lived under Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, or to have lived under Harun al-Rashid, or to have lived under Nasr Qalawun, the great king of the Mamluks, that his reign was the most incredible, or Nasr Muhammad, in the Andalus, right? It would have been nice to live under those people, but not everyone gets what they want. And you have to ask yourself, and I was talking about this in the khutbah today, when Jerusalem was lost, the Crusaders took it for about 100 years. 100 years. There was no prayer in Masjid al-Aqsa, right? They actually used, and I saw it with my own eyes. If you go to Jerusalem, the campus of Al-Aqsa has an entire masjid that is underground. It's called Al-Musalla al-Marwan. You remember? Those who came to Umrah with us that year, we saw it. And so Al-Musalla al-Marawani is a section of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa that is entirely underground, right? And it has, like, you pray, it's like a masjid, right? But it's underground. The Crusaders used it as stables for their horses, right? For 100 years. There are people that were born in that 100 years and died thinking that, the Muslim world is gone. We're being crushed by the Crusaders. And then what happened in 1187? Salahuddin comes, he takes over, he builds the Ayyubi dynasty, he takes Jerusalem back from the Crusaders, and it was a period of Nahda, right? It was a period of enlightenment, it was a period of learning, it was a period of incredible military, economic, and cultural strength for the Muslims at the time. And it's the cycles of history continue. We just happen to live in the era, where Muslims are struggling around the world. That hasn't always been the case, and will not always be the case. Make no mistake about that. The question is not whether I live in those beautiful, prosperous times or not. The question is, am I planting my seed so that when the prosperous times actually come, I have done my part? That is the most essential question. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our good deeds and to forgive us our sins and to increase our knowledge of the Quran. Jazakumullah khair. Inshallah, I'll take some questions. We're going to pray Isha maybe, in about 15 minutes, inshallah. Unless you don't have any questions, in which case we can just pray Isha right now. I can go home and sleep because I'm super jet lagged. Any questions? Yes.
Did you still have the taboo?
Say again?
The taboo.
Uh-huh.
They still have it now?
They don't. They don't. It would have been nice. It would have been nice, but they don't have it. Yeah, it was lost again throughout history. Yeah. Remember that after Sulaiman alayhi salam, a couple of centuries after, Jerusalem was sacked by the Persians. It's completely obliterated by, King, Nebuchadnezzar. And so everything was gone. 55,000 Hebrews were taken into Persia as slaves. And so that was their time to lose, basically.
Archaeologists are still looking. There's like these expeditions of trying to find the Ark of the Covenant. If you watch the Discovery Channel, they will.
Yeah, I mean,
episodes about it.
The staff of Musa, who wouldn't want to have that?
Right.
Yeah. I don't think that they do that, for religious reasons.
Right.
They probably just want to sell it on eBay or, put it in the Louvre or something. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please.
My question was, you were talking about the resilience, right? And marching forward, even if outwardly you might be losing, whether it's the support of people or you're not seeing the results that you're wanting. So the question then becomes where do you find that resilience? How do you know that this is worth fighting for, or that, hey, I have to pivot, I have to change, and your thoughts and the mechanisms, and obviously renewing your intentions, all of that, but any other feedback on it?
Right. And so I think the most essential part of this question is to be able to verify the veracity of the cause that you're fighting for. And so that is, I think that is the general answer to the question. How to make that verification, I think, is going to require some further discussion. And so, again, the most essential part is I need to verify the truthfulness of the cause. What am I fighting for? Am I fighting for my own ego? Because sometimes that's what it is. I'm just being stubborn, right? And I want to have my way, all right? Am I fighting for my own ego? And I think the way to check that is you ask yourself, am I more offended when I get personally attacked or when the cause gets attacked? If you're more offended when you personally get attacked, then this is just about you. But if you're more offended when the cause gets attacked, then there is some sincerity there. So we have to verify and make sure that we're fighting for the right cause. Now, how do I verify that I'm fighting for the right cause? By using the Islamic litmus tests, by going through the list. What is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires me to do in this dunya? Right? What am I being prevented from doing that I'm fighting against? Right? And so, am I fighting for the cause of justice? The Quran is littered with injunctions, about justice and injustice and so forth. Am I fighting for the liberation of people, for the self-determination of people? Am I fighting for what am I fighting for? And you have to verify that you're fighting for the right cause. I've seen a lot of Muslims completely give themselves up to left-wing liberal activism in America and fighting with such fervor. I was like, I appreciate your effort, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, am I fighting for the right cause? And I'm not suggesting that the solution is to, fight for Republican values either, right? They're a bunch of nut jobs. The solution is to carve out that a proper spiritual and intellectual space that is tailored in accordance with Islamic teachings. It doesn't have to reflect any existing social institutions, particularly. No, we'll make them if we have to. That's the spirit of resilience. Maybe that is the fight, is that those institutions that reflect Islamic values are just not there and they need to be created, right? And so, I think once you have identified the cause and once you have made sure that the cause is veracious, then I think it just becomes a matter of fighting your own shaitan and constantly making dua every single day that you don't falter. Wallahi, I've seen people falter over the years, man. I've seen it with my own eyes. And I've seen people bend over backwards, and I've seen people just break to the wind. And so you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have this steadfastness because it's a gift from God. Not everyone gets it, by the way. People are so good at finding excuses. So dua is really important to keep you straight on that path. Dua that you never get caught up with your own ego. Dua that you continue to fight for the right things. Dua that you continue to have the energy and the resilience to do it no matter what. I remember the story of Sa'id ibn Jubayr, radiallahu anhu, was one of the great scholars of Tabi'een. He was from the Mawali, right? So he's Persian, he's Farsi, he's not Arab. Even though for those guys, the Arabic language was the language of knowledge, right? And I say that the same thing today, by the way. It's perfectly fine for you to retain your native tongue. You want to speak English, that's perfectly fine. You want to speak Farsi or Urdu, that's your prerogative, that's your culture, that's how you grew up. You should take honor and pride in that, right? But you also have to have the Arabic language. The Arabic language is the language of our civilization. Language is not just means of articulation. I say this idea in Arabic using these words or making those sounds, and in English I make those sounds. No. Language is the very operating system of the brain, right? It determines everything. It determines how you see the world. It determines culture. It determines customs and traditions and so forth. If you don't have the Arabic language, you continue to lack severely in understanding the overall purposes of Islam in this world, right? And so you have to have the Arabic language. You can have all kinds of languages, but you have to have the Arabic language. That is your civilizational means of communication, right? The Arabic language. And so, again, you constantly check yourself. You constantly check your heart, and you constantly ask yourself, am I really doing this for the right reasons? And let the rest, in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes.
It's very enlightening. May Allah put light in your hands and your face in the day of judgment. It's full of lessons. Number one, there's a difference between victory and success. Victory is the agency of Allah. Success is human agency. And that success, in order to achieve it, you have to have the sincerity of the commitment. And you have to focus on quality and not quantity. It is, and you said it's a long-term game. I would say it's an infinite game. Regardless of what you achieve, as long as it's a success, even if it's small steps, right? And the grand scheme with the agency of Allah, it will be given the victory to those that deserve it, and the victory will be a lot more durable instead of my victory, which is going to be maybe short term, very fast. So this is filled of this stuff. And the connection between the human agency and Allah's agency is that we always keep reminding ourselves that we need the help and the support and the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter what is the strength and the sincerity of our commitment, without the guidance and the support and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're always falter.
SubhanAllah. That is a really fair point. I appreciate that. Jazakallah khair. I wanted to go back to what I was saying earlier. I think I lost track of my own train of thought. I was talking about Sa'id ibn Jubayr. I think I'm way too sleepy to connect the ideas. I said that Sa'id was a Farsi guy. Was one of the tabi'een, a great scholar in his own right. But he engaged in what he saw to be the right cause, and that is to rise against the Umayyads and to join the rebellion, right? So he joins the rebellion of a man from Iraq. His name is Al-Ash'ath or something like that. And long story short, the rebellion is defeated. Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, who was the Umayyad strong man, in Iraq, defeated them. Hajjaj was an incredible figure, by the way. I think you guys need to read about him. He's an enigmatic figure. Just so much charisma and so much ruthlessness and cruelty, so many contradictory things, kind of combined in the same man. He walks into the masjid in Basra when in Iraq is full of chaos, under Yazid. And he walks into the masjid. This is a city of about 400,000 or 500,000 people. And there was tens of thousands of people in the masjid. This is the large masjid where, Imam Ali used to give the khutbah, right? Massive masjid of Basra. He walks into the masjid with 10 men. That's it. And he takes the microphone, proverbially, and he gives a speech of 5 minutes. And he says, I will exact the type of carnage on this city that humanity had never seen before. You cross any line, I will slaughter you. You show any resistance, I will slaughter you. You pray an extra rak'ah, I will slaughter you. You raise your voice or you lower your voice, I will slaughter you. Just the kind of things that he said, you're just reading it in a book and you're really shivering, right? 5 minutes and that's it. The entire city is back in order. That's all he needed to do, right? So he defeats the rebels and he captures Sa'id. Oh, this is a great scholar who narrated hadith. He captures Sa'id ibn Jubayr and he says, here you are just by yourself. All the other men have been killed. No one remains but you. It's time now to take your pledge of allegiance and to basically accept Yazid as the Khalif, right? And his response was the most incredible thing. He says, because he kept accusing him of dividing the community and the Jama'ah and stuff like that. His response was, Al-Jama'atu ma wafaqa al-haqq walau kana wahida. True Jama'ah is what follows what is truthful, even if it's one person. It's not about the numbers. And I will continue to say what I say, even if I am the only last remaining person on earth. That's resilience. It's just unimaginable. And he was executed, and he died. He died as a shaheed, right? And subhanAllah, before he died, he prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to destroy al-Hajjaj. Allahumma la tusallithu ala ahadin min ba'di yaqtul. Lord, do not subject anyone after me to the cruelty of Hajjaj. SubhanAllah, 3 weeks later, Hajjaj had an illness and he died, right? He did not kill a single man after Sa'id. How to achieve that level of resilience? Obviously, that's a lifetime, of commitment and devotion and research, but it is definitely achievable. Yes.
I have a question about this, about the excerpt that we discussed today. While we're talking about having discipline and having discipline in our community, then this is like the army of the Yoshua ibn Nun. We're facing here with the dilemma. When does rebellion? How does rebellion become? Rebellion is actually inciting a rebellion is actually the opposite of having discipline in a community. So we're facing the dilemma here that you have, you say that having discord, that you cannot have conflicts in a community, but you can have differences of opinion. Now the problem is, beside this, that we need to work on nation building or community building in our communities, societies, even countries. And you tell people who are working on with the goodness of their cause, and you tell them that we need to have discipline. We cannot cross that line. But then they say that just like you mentioned, that the Jumaa is Jumaa is even one person, or they'll say that I am the Ibrahim of my time. I don't need to have followers, or I don't need the whole country to follow me. Now you have like multiple people doing their own little things, and then having this work is completely opposite of what we discussed in Surat Baqarah. So how do you reconcile between the two dilemmas?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm not sure if we have time to address it thoroughly, but our scholars they disagree on those same lines. There are Muslim scholars who belong to the tradition of quietism. They forbid rebellion. They forbid revolutions. They forbid political opposition. They say, follow the leader, even if the leader is a tyrant, as long as the leader is still Muslim and the leader still furthers the cause of the ummah and does not commit, haram things publicly and stuff like that. And then there is the other tradition, where the scholars cite the ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, Sayyidu Shuhada'i Hamza, the best of shuhada is Hamza, وَرَجُلٌ قَامَ إِلَى سُلْطَانٍ جَائِرٍ فَأَمَرَهُ فَنَهَاهُ فَقَتَلَهُ. Stood up against a tyrant and tried to correct the tyrant, and the tyrant killed him. And so our scholars are divided on those two lines. And there are pros and cons to both perspectives. In hindsight, people might look back at Syria, for example, and say, what did the revolution do in Syria? The country was torn to pieces, and nothing good came out of that. Or Yemen, or Iraq, or whatever it is. And so I think that you need to be aware of those two perspectives. They're both backed up by very strong religious opinions, and you have to basically make your pick. Do I have the answer to the $64,000 question? I don't think so. I think I have my own views about that. I feel that turmoil is sometimes necessary for positive change, and that we get caught up, I think, in the short periods of history. We look at 5 years and 10 years and 20 years, when in reality we need to look at 100 and 200 and 300 and 500 years. Short periods of violence may appear to be painful as people experience them, but sometimes in the long term they are necessary. This type of stagnation in societies, yes, I mean, it looks stable, but the deen is destroyed. At the end of the day, you really have to choose between the sanctity of human life and the sanctity of religious values. Which one are you supposed to uphold? Sometimes you have to choose between one or the other. And so I'm not advocating for violence. I'm just saying, if you look at every positive change that happened in history, it happened through conquest, it happened through warfare. I was talking earlier about, George Washington. The United States was born out of massive war and carnage and hundreds of thousands of deaths. 600,000 soldiers died in not the War of Independence, in the Civil War, before Abraham Lincoln, brought it to a conclusion. Okay? We keep talking about Salah ad-Din. How did Salah ad-Din, liberate Jerusalem? He had to fight his way through Iraq, through Palestine, through Egypt, and he established a dynasty, and that's when he actually went and took Jerusalem back. Again, you call me whatever you want to call me. I don't think that. I think that the shortest path to actual change, unfortunately, happens through violence. Not to advocate violence. I'm describing how history unfolds. I'm not saying let's go commit violence. I'm just saying this is how history unfolds. Is that change doesn't happen when people come together on a table and discuss things and be cordial to each other. Change happens when a strong man, when someone with a heart is willing to do what the other guys are not willing to. Again, the followers of this school would say that is the very definition of discipline. That's why I'm saying, both views exist in our Islamic tradition, and both of them are legitimate, backed up by very, very strong support in the Sharia. And so it is definitely, I think this is something that you'd have to research, further on your own. You probably have to pray Isha, you guys. So if you have any other questions, inshallah, I'll stick around after Isha, and we can always talk about it. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wa 'asr al-insana fi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. Inshallah, we will pray